An abomination, depressing season, probably the worst season for NASCAR.
Go back to a real points format.
Just wake me up whenever a Gen 7 car comes out, and hope to God it's a good car, because I don't know if it can get worse.
It's over! Fucking NASCAR is over! Pack it up, put it on a hauler, and send it to the fucking junkyard! This is a fucking travesty! Why? Fucking why? This motherfucker who has done everything in his power to make my life miserable!
So as you can see, there seems to be a ton of anger and vitriol out in the NASCAR world, and many fans, YouTubers, and social media participants are saying they're done with the sport. And rather than be disingenuous or brush this off and say, see you in February, I think there's a little bit more to this. But I have a question. Why? Why this year? Why this playoff? Why this chase format? And why Joey Logano? It almost seems like this was the final straw in a lot of people's minds that broke the camel's back. So, I looked through my YouTube comments, nearly 600 of them at the time of recording, on my Championship 4 review, where I made a bit of a point that I thought Joey Logano was the perfect champion in the eyes of NASCAR. His championship was kind of the reason the chase format was brought to the forefront in the first place. He wasn't necessarily the best all year, but he stepped it up in prime time in the Game 7 moment and was able to come away with the championship. So in those comments, I've selected a few. There are some good comments, some positive comments, and quite a few negative comments. But each of these comments I've suggested or brought up have interesting suggestions or points that I think kind of weave together the entire picture of what NASCAR fans are feeling in the year 2018 and going into the year 2019, where there are a lot of question marks and a lot of unhappy fans with the current direction of the sport. So let's start reading some of these comments, and I'll try to explain or at least respond to some of the points made. That was the perfect outcome from NASCAR's perspective. Here's the problem though. Even when the storyline works well and the racing is good in the championship race, it doesn't make up for the complete torture of the other 35 events. And there's still something very wrong about winning a race and therefore becoming the champion. It's not special at all. And that's been a main criticism of the change in format that began in 2014 with the top 4 contenders heading on to Homestead with a shot at the title, rather than what it had been in the previous few years, where it was a points championship, essentially a reset for the top 10, 11, 12, whatever it ended up being towards the end of that particular format. And then the championship could be decided before Homestead, but more or less it was usually at least 1 or 2 guys heading into Homestead with a chance at the championship. This new format, of course, brings 4 drivers in there with an equal shot at the championship. And this was really the first year, though I would argue that 2015 was also a year where this happened, where you go into Homestead and one of the top 2 guys doesn't win the championship. A wild card wins the championship. And again, it's nothing against Joey Logano, but he was the 4th seed. If you look at statistically the entire year going into it, he was definitely number 4 going into the race, and he came out with the championship. That has rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way, and you saw it reflected in that comment, and you'll see it reflected in a few more coming up. Here's a comment that's a perfect counterpoint. Joey was the best driver in the playoffs. Who cares about how strong some were through the season? That's just to get to the playoffs. You need to perform there even more. Hell, Truex and Harvick couldn't even win to get in and had to get a free pass because of points. Joey was better than them when it counted most on race day. So I don't know if you know this, but I do disagree with this gentleman or lady or whoever this anonymous commentator was. I agree with your final point. Joey did get it done on race day, and that's why I said I thought, again, Joey was kind of the perfect example of what NASCAR wanted to create with a playoff system. That being said, I think you've missed the point here with your comment saying, look, the only thing that matters is the playoffs. This is the problem that NASCAR fans have, or at least the hardcore ones, or at least the traditionalist ones. the fact that the first 25 races or 26 races don't matter once you get to the last 10 kind of defeats the purpose of having a season-long championship. In fact, NASCAR has acknowledged this by having a regular season champion that's been awarded. By the way, the 2 times that they've awarded it, the driver that ended up having the regular season championship would have also won the points championship at the end of the season. Coincidence? I think not. So, and this is the thing, is that there's a lot of NASCAR fans out there, you'll hear from more of them later as well, that really like the playoff format because of the fact that it gives them some reason to watch the last 10 races. To me, the reason to watch the last 10 races is to watch a race, not to watch some convoluted championship format. But there are some people out there, there's definitely a market for this, albeit I would guess pretty small, that enjoy this kind of championship format. Here's what I don't like. I would want to have the champion for any series be on the basis that they performed well throughout the season. Did Logano have the best overall performance throughout the season? No, he didn't. It was either Truex or Harvick. That's where the NASCAR points system is flawed so much. So we kind of have this back and forth argument. There's this person making the argument that, hey, look, exactly what I just said. It's the full season. It's a season champion. You don't think that Richard Petty performed the best out of his group of drivers in his championship seasons? A lot of people bring up Matt Kenseth in the 2003 season where he didn't have a whole lot of wins. We're going to discuss that later as well. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Championships, if they're awarded properly in motorsports, or at least traditionally in motorsports, they are going to reward consistency, and there's pretty much nothing you can do to change that. In fact, in reality, the playoff system still rewards consistency. If you have 1 or 2 bad results, you're out. You're eliminated. So you're always going to have a system, unless they completely overhaul it again, which rewards the consistency. The problem is now that it's consistency over 10 events rather than 36. Okay, this is one I had to edit a bit because it got a little profane, but his point was good, so I'll put it in. Modern NASCAR. Harvick and Kyle Busch dominate the season. Logano accidentally races to the Final Four. Logano accidentally wins a championship because Homestead is the only track that matters these days. NASCAR, get it together. Get rid of this playoff points system because it robbed Kyle Busch and Harvick of a deserved championship, and give it to Logano, who shouldn't have even been racing for a championship based on the real point system. Even in the name of this playoff system is bad. NASCAR does play. We don't play NASCAR, we race. So there's a couple things to break down there. Obviously, this guy, not really a fan of the playoff system. He's being a bit, I would say, unfair to Logano. Again, I do believe he earned it under the current system. I don't think there was a whole lot of accidents outside of the one that he almost caused with Truex at Martinsville, but regardless, yes, Logano did earn it under this system. The problem, as this guy pointed out, is the system itself is flawed, and it produces champions who may not actually really be the champion in the eyes of most fans. That also being said, I think he makes a great point by saying, why are you calling it the playoffs? I saw a joke on Twitter today that said, when are racetracks going to be called fields, and when are stage wins going to start being called touchdowns? That's kind of the thing that where this is going. I mean, you don't play racing. It's not a sport that you play. It's not a game like a football or soccer would be in the traditional sense. It's not a stick and ball sport. Stick and ball sports a lot of times can be considered games. You can't really consider a blood sport, which really ultimately auto racing is, as a game. No kids are going out there, well, they are nowadays, but that's a whole nother issue that we could bring up. No kids are going out in the backyard and saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go race. That's part of the reason as well that racing has a bit of a disconnect with, say, urban audiences. It's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have means to actually, pay attention to racing to be able to experience it or understand it, because simply if you don't have access to it and you don't have a way to participate, it's very difficult to connect to it. Don't let this distract you, but if you win 8 races, you can still lose the Cup Championship. So that's a quick one and a quick rebuttal from me. I think there's a big misconception about wins and championships. Again, it's consistency over the full season. I'll bring back up the 2003 example. You know who had the most wins that year? It was Ryan Newman. The guy who won the championship, Matt Kenseth. Largely considered by a lot of NASCAR fans one of the greatest of all time, especially one of the greatest in this particular era. Do you say the same thing or think the same thing about Ryan Newman? No, you don't. Why? Because Ryan Newman was fast in 2003, but since then, where has he been? Matt Kenseth, by the way, finished 6th at Homestead in this year. Where the hell was Newman? So if you look at it, over the course of the years, when it was a points-based system, the cream rose to the top. And again, we see, I think, reaction to the fans looking at some of these drivers who are winning championships. Fans are thinking, rightly or wrongly, that these drivers aren't really the ones who are the best in the sport, and thus NASCAR's kind of waving a bit of a false flag saying, hey, Logano is our best driver, even though a lot of fans' perception is Harvick's the best driver because he won the most races. And by the way, this misconception was brought up by NASCAR themselves by changing the point system in 2014 with the intention of making wins count more. Because they hear that a lot from fans, they changed the system. Well, wins count, they just only count at Martinsville and Homestead now. And that's the reality of the situation. I don't understand why what Logano did at Martinsville is okay, and literally any other racing series on the planet he gets a penalty for that. I don't understand it. They race hard and clean for 10 laps, Truex completes the move, and Joey punts him off. I don't watch NASCAR that often, so maybe I'm an uncultured swine, but I don't see how that's acceptable. In my eyes, Logano does not deserve the championship. So this is one you get from non-hardcore NASCAR fans, but hardcore racing fans. They don't really understand the whole Rubbins racing thing about NASCAR. Hell, that was a criticism of me when Austin Dillon wrecked Eric Almirola at the Daytona 500. But there is a valid point in this, despite the fact that, yes, that was a very NASCAR-style move, and myself, personally, I didn't really see too much of a problem with it. That being said, what is the perception when you have a look like that where the driver who wrecked a guy to get a win wins the championship? Now, a lot of people were pointing blame at Truex, saying, well, why didn't Truex wreck him at Homestead? Like I said in my review, I think Truex was trying to race cleaner than that, wanted to win the championship clean and stand up on top of the high horse in victory lane. That didn't happen. I think also you have to take into account the fact that Truex is largely a pretty popular driver, and if, again, like I said kind of in the preview videos, if you didn't have a driver in the championship 4, you were probably pulling for Truex. The vast majority of people were pulling for Truex, and Logano, not nearly as popular. In fact, he may be the least popular of the 4, and that's saying something when you can consider Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick are 2 of the other most hated drivers in NASCAR. Prior to the Super Bowl era, the NFL didn't have a playoff or championship game. The Super Bowl came in, then a playoff, and then the current format we have. You don't hear anything about the Cleveland Browns and their NFL championships in the pre-Super Bowl era. I think NASCAR now is at a point where for the good of the sport, they have to stick to a playoff system. All past track champions running won it in the playoff era. Only 6 drivers from the Winston Cup era are left, and NASCAR is really in their 3rd era. Like it or not, the playoffs should stick around. Yes, a team could surprise everyone at Homestead, but every sport with a playoff has seen this. The best example being the Giants beating an undefeated team in the Super Bowl. So let's talk about the NFL and NASCAR comparisons when it comes to playoff. I'll give you the first point that will completely blow this up immediately. The comparisons that, while it works for the NFL, it should work for NASCAR. Remind me when all 32 NFL teams play each other at the same time. Oh yeah, that's right, it doesn't happen. But the top 36 in NASCAR points and the top 36 championship or the charter system teams, which are really the important ones anyway because they're the ones that show up for all the races. They show up for every single race and do battle across a variety of tracks every single week. And at the end of the day, you know who the best ones are and you know who the worst ones are, and you don't need a playoff to be able to determine that. You see, when what he's talking about, the Giants beating the undefeated New England Patriots in the Super Bowl around 2012, you have to consider that maybe the Giants were the better team all along. They may have had a more difficult schedule or just had games where their luck didn't fall their way, while the Patriots had a little bit better luck, maybe a easier schedule. Certainly the AFC East isn't the strongest division in football. So when you look at all the factors, an undefeated season from a team like the New England Patriots doesn't surprise a whole lot of people. And that's kind of why you have a playoff format in the first place in the NFL. Again, because all the teams don't play each other, you really don't know who the best in football is until you have a bracket to kind of eliminate the posers from the ones who are really that good. The Giants in that Super Bowl proved they were really that good, and the Patriots were exposed a bit as not being as great as their record showed. That, and again, when you look at it from a NASCAR perspective, how could you deny that Harvick, Busch, and Truex were the best all season? In fact, again, you couldn't deny that Logano was fourth. Should Logano have been in that particular situation? Again, it's not really a traditional playoff format. It's not, drivers going head to head or the seeds of drivers going head to head. They're all racing together all the time. So again, the fan perception is we know who the best drivers are. You don't necessarily know that in football. That's why. What we saw was 4 drivers racing and the rest cruising around. Nobody would race them or mix it up. That's what happens with this format. It blows. No more playoff. Races, boring. Here's another criticism that is levied at the playoff system, which is interesting and kind of an unintended consequence of NASCAR trying to spice up the show in the waning races of the year. You have this situation where if a non-championship driver wrecks a playoff driver, suddenly they get a ton of social media hate. I'm sure they get called to the big red truck, or I guess the big green truck now in NASCAR, and get a stern talking to and double secret probation for getting messed up in the playoffs. We've seen drivers in the past, especially at Homestead, lay over and die so that a playoff driver can go take the win, particularly Kyle Larson in the last 2 years. It was going to be a third year probably where Larson had the best car and was not allowed to race until his tire mysteriously blew out. Boy, that was lucky. But again, a lot of fans just want to see a race, and they want to see everybody in that race give it 110% to win that race that they're watching. In the playoff format, that is not conducive. It's all about the championship. It's all about the points. And in a lot of ways, you've gone from a few races a year where there's points racing towards the end when drivers are trying to lock up their spots, to now you've got 10 guaranteed races where you're going to have points racing throughout. And while it leads to some moments like we saw at Martinsville, for the most part, it leads to fairly boring processional racing because people are afraid to race the 16 playoff drivers. And this is the final comment. It's a long one, but I think it's worth reading. NASCAR tries to keep forcing Game 7 moments to happen, but they forget the most important part of drama and tension of a Game 7 is the closely fought, evenly matched 6 games to get to Game 7. And there is no rarity and no guarantee that a Game 7 is even needed. Game 7 is one of the best parts of North American sports because they come from 2 evenly matched teams, proving that they need a winner-take-all game to decide their series when most other series are finished in 5 and 6 games. This is where football often comes up short in the playoffs as well. In that having a single elimination game that you're just as likely to see a dramatic finish as you are to see a really one-sided game that's basically over by halftime. And you will get some one-sided Game 7s too, but that is far less likely to happen. In racing, you get seasons where a championship is decided before the final race of the year. 5 of the last 6 pre-chase playoff seasons. 6 of the last Formula One seasons. But the rarity of the last title fight lasting the entire season and needing to be decided on track with no point standings manipulation, knowing that everyone involved is there on a season-long merit rather than putting on one good performance, is the exact right time. And being okay with the best of the other 90% of the season will always produce more substantially memorable moments in championship finales, albeit at a reduced pace. People will remember the 1992 NASCAR season, and Kawicki leading 103 laps to Elliott's 102, and in the end winning the championship. And of course, also the end of the 2008 Formula One season, Hamilton passing Glock on the last turn to finish 1 point ahead of Massa, because it was a season-long, evenly matched battle that went down to the wire. So I think really that comment, albeit long-winded, kind of gets to the root of the problem. NASCAR has created a system where you're guaranteed a Game 7 moment every single year. And I've brought this up numerous times, not even just about NASCAR, I've brought it up about IndyCar racing as well in terms of like pack racing. When you set an expectation that something will happen every year, you do two things. Number one, you devalue the moments that actually do happen kind of naturally. The exciting finishes, the close finishes, the wrecking intentionally, all the craziness that can kind of come from this wonderful sport of auto racing. By creating situations that encourage that sort of stuff, you devalue the natural excitement of the event. The other problem is you devalue that natural excitement or the unnatural excitement that you're trying to create. Unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where, again, the championship itself really doesn't matter until the last race. And despite having this fantastic playoff format, you see ratings continue to decline at the rate probably more so than they were in the Winston Cup era. Why is that? Well, again, like I said previously, really the only two races that matter in the playoffs these days are the elimination race, or on the odd chance you get a victory that locks yourself in the Elite 8 or whatever they call it, the Championship 8. And then you go on to Homestead, and then Homestead is the only race that matters. So out of the 10, really only 2 end up mattering, maybe a max of 5. And when you're having a situation where there's only 5 out of 10 races that matter and the other ones aren't worth tuning in for, because who cares what's going to happen? You know, there's going to be points racing throughout the thing. The Jeff Burton and Steve Letarte are going to say playoff about 10,000 times. What's the idea of watching this if you're not going to get the entertainment value from the race because you're going to have the playoffs crammed down your throat? I think a lot of this stuff is the main issue with the NASCAR playoffs and why you've seen such a vitriolic response to Joey Logano winning the championship. I don't think it's necessarily because Joey Logano is this horrible, evil supervillain that everybody hates, though there is some of that. I don't think that's the problem, because again, where were you in 2015 when Kyle Busch won the championship from a hospital bed? Or where were you in 2011 when Tony Stewart won after being pretty much nowhere the rest of the season? So, yeah, I mean, this system has been broken. It's always been broken. I mean, you could go back to Jimmy Johnson winning 7 championships in the chase. He probably has 5 or 4 legitimate championships, and I know I'm going to get hate for that. Oh, well. He's certainly one of the greatest of all time. The wins certainly show that, but the championships, he's not even with Petty or Earnhardt. I'm sorry. That being said, I mean, and again, a lot of fans know this. A lot of fans realize this. A lot of fans see that, and you're just seeing this, you know, whatever it is. It's like 13, 14 years now of this format. You've seen it build up and build up and build up, and I think we're finally at the breaking point where fans are, you know, tuning out. I may be wrong, but the numbers don't seem to lie on this one. So, what do you think down in the comments? Do you think Joey Logano is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. It should be an interesting discussion. I'm guessing it's going to be a very heated one. So I hope you have fun in the comments doing battle. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, subscribe for more NASCAR and motorsports content. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video. Oh my God, I just did that entire video and I didn't have it recorded.